At 2 a.m., someone knocked on my door, and before I even sat up in bed, I knew something was wrong. Not because of the knock itself. People knock on doors for all sorts of reasons. Drunk neighbors, lost teenagers, someone's car breaking down, a delivery sent to the wrong address. Life is full of harmless explanations. But this knock didn't sound harmless. It was steady, measured, 3 knocks evenly spaced, as if whoever was standing out there had practiced patience and didn't need to prove it. I lay still beneath my quilt, staring into the darkness, listening. The house was quiet in that deep way only night can make it quiet. No traffic, no distant televisions, no dogs barking. Just the soft hum of my refrigerator somewhere down the hall and my own breathing, suddenly too loud. Then it came again. 3 knocks. Same rhythm. My heart began to thump, not fast, but heavy, like it had woken up before the rest of me did. I reached for my bedside lamp without turning it on. Old habit. After my husband passed, I learned to keep my movements quiet at night. The house felt safer if I didn't announce myself. My name is Ruth Caldwell. I'm 72 years old, and I've lived in this house long enough to recognize every creak in the floor and every groan in the pipes when the heat kicks on. I've lived here long enough to know what belongs and what doesn't. A knock at 2 a.m. does not belong. I slid my feet into slippers and pulled my robe tight around me. The fabric felt too thin for the cold that had suddenly settled in my skin. I walked down the hallway slowly, careful not to trip on the runner rug that always curled at one corner. As I moved, I listened for anything else. Voices, footsteps, laughter, a car idling. Nothing. Just silence, and the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore, even inside my own home. When I reached the front door, the porch light was off. That bothered me. Anyone coming in the middle of the night usually turns it on, even if they don't mean to. It's instinct, it's courtesy, it's the normal rhythm of being human. But the porch light stayed dark, and that made whoever was outside feel intentional. I leaned closer to the door, not touching the deadbolt yet, and asked, "Who is it?" For a moment there was no answer, just enough time for my stomach to tighten. Then a voice spoke through the door, calm and low, as if we were discussing something ordinary. "Mrs. Caldwell, we need to speak with you." They said my name. Not ma'am's. Not sorry to bother you. Not is anyone home. My name's. My last name, pronounced correctly, with the kind of confidence that meant they weren't guessing. A cold weight dropped into my chest. I hadn't told anyone where I lived recently. My daughter knew, of course, but she lived 2 states away. My neighbors would never show up at 2 a.m. unless the house was on fire. And if it were an emergency, they'd be shouting, not speaking like that. I didn't open the door. Not yet. I slid the small curtain on the sidelight window just an inch, careful not to expose my face. The glass was textured, making the outside look like a blur of shapes, but I could see enough. 2 silhouettes on my porch, both standing still, not swaying, not nervous, not fidgeting. Waiting. I backed away from the window and pressed my hand to the doorknob. It felt cold, as if it had been holding the night on the other side. I tried to steady my voice. "Who are you?" Another pause. Then the same voice answered, polite, controlled. "Just a few questions, Mrs. Caldwell. It won't take long." I didn't like that either. because people who won't take long usually feel the need to convince you of it. They say it quickly, like a promise. They sound apologetic. This voice sounded certain. My mind began offering possibilities, one by one, like it was flipping through an old filing cabinet of fears. Maybe it was the police. Maybe something happened to my daughter. Maybe it was a mistake. But something in me, older and quieter, rejected those explanations. If it was the police, they would say so. If something happened to my family, they would lead with that. If it was a mistake, they wouldn't know my name. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached for the chain lock. I hooked it into place first, then unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door just enough for the chain to hold. Cold air rushed in, sharp and clean. 2 men stood on my porch. Not teenagers, not neighbors, not drunk. Adults, late 30s or 40s maybe, dark jackets. Faces set in a way that told me they hadn't come here for small talk. The porch light flicked on automatically as the door opened, revealing them more clearly. The taller one looked directly at me, like he was used to people being intimidated. The shorter one kept his eyes calm, scanning without seeming to scan. Professional, but not friendly. "Are you Ruth Caldwell?" the taller man asked. "Yes," I said, my voice tighter now. "What is this about?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced down at his watch, then back at me as if time mattered to him. "May we come inside?" he said. It wasn't phrased like a request. It was phrased like something that had already been decided. "I'm not letting strangers into my house at 2 in the morning," I replied. The shorter man reached into his jacket and pulled out an ID, flashing it quickly. Not long enough for me to read the details, just long enough to see a seal and a photo. "We're not strangers," he said calmly, "and we don't want to do this out here." "What are you?" I asked. "Police." The taller man's mouth tightened slightly, like he'd been asked this before. "We're with an investigative unit," he said. "We need to ask you a few questions regarding a matter connected to your name." Connected to my name. My throat went dry. "I don't understand," I said. "You will," he replied. That answer was so cold, so matter-of-fact, that my fear changed shape. It stopped being vague. It became specific. Because suddenly I wasn't afraid of an accident, or a misunderstanding, or a random threat. I was afraid that they knew something about me that I didn't know about myself. Behind me, the house was dark and quiet. My living room, my hallway, the photos on the wall, all the familiar proof of a life that had been ordinary for decades. On the porch, 2 men stood like they had stepped out of another world. One where my name meant something it hadn't meant to me in a long time. "Mrs. Caldwell," the shorter man said, softer now, "we're not here to hurt you. But we do need to talk, and we need to do it now." I held the chain tight, my knuckles pale. "About what?" I whispered. The taller man's eyes didn't soften. "About what happened in 1989, he said. The air seemed to leave my lungs. I hadn't heard that year spoken aloud in a long time. Not in this house. Not by anyone who was supposed to know it. My mouth opened, but no words came out. The porch light hummed faintly above us, and the night felt suddenly enormous, pressing in from every side. The taller man leaned slightly closer. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, and this time his voice was lower, almost careful. We can do this the easy way, or we can do it the hard way. And in that moment, standing there with the chain between us, I realized something terrifying. They didn't just know my name. They knew my past. For a moment, I couldn't move. 1989 sat between us like a living thing, heavy and breathing. A year I had folded away and sealed so tightly that even I rarely touched it. Not in memory, not in conversation, not even in quiet moments when the house felt too empty and the night pressed in. I tightened my grip on the doorframe, my fingers aching. "You have the wrong person," I said, though my voice lacked conviction even to my own ears. The taller man didn't react, didn't argue, didn't reassure me. Instead, he said quietly, "We don't." The shorter man glanced past me, into the darkness of my hallway, as if measuring the distance between the door and whatever lay deeper inside the house. "We're not here about something recent," he said, "and we're not here because of a mistake." I swallowed, then why now? The taller man finally exhaled, slow and controlled, "Because someone talked." The words landed harder than any accusation. Someone talked. I felt the floor tilt slightly beneath me. My knees weakened, and I shifted my weight without realizing it. "There's no one to talk," I said. "There hasn't been anyone for years." "That's not accurate," the shorter man replied. "Not anymore." Silence stretched between us. The chain rattled faintly as my hand trembled. Behind me, the clock in the living room clicked over to 2:07 a.m. Every instinct told me not to let them in. Every part of me that had survived decades alone told me that opening the door would change something permanently. But another instinct, older and quieter, whispered something worse. If I didn't let them in, they would come back. With more people, with paperwork, with consequences I couldn't manage on my own. "5 minutes," I said finally. "You stand right there." I removed the chain and opened the door wider, stepping back just enough for them to enter. They moved with purpose, not aggressive but confident. The taller one stayed closer to the door, the shorter one stepped farther in, taking in the room in a single glance. They didn't sit until I gestured to the couch. I remained standing. "You said this was about 1989, I said. "Then say what you need to say." The shorter man nodded. "Do you remember a woman named Elaine Mercer?" The name hit me like a sudden wind. Elaine's. I hadn't said it aloud in decades. "Yes," I said slowly, "I knew her." "Not casually," the taller man said. "You worked together." I nodded. "At the hospital." "And you were close," he added. I hesitated. "We were friends," I said. The shorter man leaned forward slightly. "Do you remember the night of August 17th? I closed my eyes. I remembered the heat, the smell of antiseptic, the sound of rain against the windows. "I remember," I said. "Elaine disappeared that night," the taller man said. "I know. She left behind a car," he continued. "Personal belongings, no note, no indication of where she was going." My chest tightened. I read about it. "You were the last person to see her alive," the shorter man said. The words felt unreal, even now. "That was never proven," I said. "No," he replied, "it was." I stared at the floor, my heart pounding in my ears. "And now," the taller man continued, "a body has been found." The room seemed to shrink. A body, I repeated faintly. Buried on private land outside the city, he said. Forensic dating places it in the late 80s. Dental records confirmed her identity last week. I felt dizzy. Elaine's gone but not gone. Not forgotten. Not anymore. We know you didn't kill her, the shorter man said suddenly. I looked up sharply. You do? Yes, he said, but we believe you know what happened. The truth pressed against my chest, begging to be let out, the way it had begged all those years ago. I tried to help her, I whispered. That's why we're here, the taller man said. My legs finally gave in, and I sat down heavily in the chair across from them. Elaine had been younger than me, brighter, restless. She talked about leaving her husband, about starting over, about being afraid. She came to me that night, I said. She said she was in trouble. What kind of trouble? The shorter man asked. She said she'd told someone something she shouldn't have, I replied. Something about money, about a patient's death that wasn't an accident. The taller man's jaw tightened. She was scared, I continued. She asked me to drive her somewhere quiet, somewhere she could think. You did, he said. Yes. I stared at my hands. She got out of the car, I said. She said she needed air. She told me to wait. I looked up at them. She never came back. The shorter man nodded slowly. And you didn't report it? No, I said, because when I went looking for her, I found blood. Not much, just enough. My voice cracked. I panicked, I whispered. I thought she was dead. I thought someone else would find her. I thought the police would assume I did it. So you left, the taller man said. Yes. And you never told anyone, he said. No. The room fell silent again. What changed? I asked. Why now? The shorter man leaned back. Elaine's husband is dying. He confessed to something shortly before losing consciousness. The words settled slowly. He didn't confess to killing her, he added, but he confessed to threatening her, to following her that night. I closed my eyes. All these years, and the truth had been buried alongside her. Mrs. Caldwell, the taller man said gently, we're going to reopen the case, and we need you to come in and give a formal statement. I nodded faintly. And, he added, there's something else. I looked up. You weren't the only one she trusted that night. My heart skipped. Who else? He paused. Your husband, he said. The room spun. My husband, I repeated. She called him earlier that evening, the shorter man said. He never mentioned it. I felt something cold and sharp twist inside me. Because suddenly, the night of 1989 wasn't just unfinished. It was tangled, and I had been living beside a man who knew more than he ever let on. For a long moment after they said my husband's name, I couldn't hear anything else. The room felt distant, like I was underwater, watching their mouths move without understanding the sound. My husband, the man I had shared a bed with for nearly 50 years, the man whose shirts I still kept in the closet, whose mug still sat in the cabinet because I never quite brought myself to give it away. You're mistaken, I said finally. He wouldn't have been involved. The shorter man didn't challenge me. That worried me more than if he had. We don't believe he was involved in her disappearance, he said carefully. But we do believe Elaine trusted him, enough to call him. Why, I asked, my voice barely audible. Because he worked in hospital administration, the taller man replied. And because he had access to records Elaine was afraid someone would erase. The air felt thick in my lungs. No, I said, he would have told me. The shorter man's expression softened slightly, not with pity, but with something closer to understanding. Mrs. Caldwell, he said, people don't always share the parts of themselves that might disturb the life they're trying to protect. That sentence landed harder than anything else they had said. Protect. My mind raced backward, years peeling away like old wallpaper. The nights he came home quiet, the way he avoided talking about work during that time, the sudden insistence we move out of the city a year later. At the time I'd welcomed it, a fresh start, a quieter life. Now it felt like a retreat. He never spoke her name again, I whispered. Not once. That doesn't mean he forgot, the taller man said. I looked down at my hands, at the thin skin and veins that marked the passage of time. All those years, I had believed our marriage survived because we were honest with each other. But honesty, I was realizing, has many forms. Did he know she was in danger? I asked. We don't know, the shorter man replied. But we believe he suspected something, enough to stay silent. Silent. The word echoed inside me. Silence had shaped so much of my life. The silence after my husband's death. The silence of a house that once held laughter. The silence of a past I refused to revisit. Now that silence felt complicit. When do you want my statement? I asked. Tomorrow morning, the taller man said. We'll have someone pick you up. I nodded slowly. As they stood to leave, the shorter man paused near the door. There's one more thing, he said. I braced myself. When Elaine disappeared, she left something behind, he continued. Something no one ever found. My heart thudded. What? A notebook, he said. She kept notes. Names, dates, details. We believe she gave it to someone for safekeeping. My mouth went dry. And you think that was me? We don't think, he replied. We know she trusted you, but we also know you weren't the only one. After they left, the house felt impossibly large. I locked the door, slid the chain into place, and leaned my back against it, my legs trembling. The quiet rushed in again, but it wasn't peaceful anymore. It was loud, crowded with memories. I walked slowly into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall where my husband's side still looked untouched, as if he might return at any moment. Had he known? Had he been afraid? Or had he simply chosen the same thing I had, silence? I rose and went to the closet, opening it fully for the first time in years. I pushed aside coats, boxes, shoes I no longer wore. And there it was, a small metal lockbox, tucked behind an old suitcase. My heart began to pound. I remembered now. Elaine had pressed it into my hands that night, her fingers shaking. If anything happens to me, she'd said, don't let them erase this. I had told myself I would open it someday. I never had. I knelt there on the floor, staring at the box, knowing that whatever was inside would change everything. Not just for Elaine, but for me, for my marriage, for the quiet life I had built on top of buried truth. The knock at 2 a.m. hadn't come to accuse me. It had come to ask me a question I had avoided for 34 years. How much truth could I finally carry? And whether I was brave enough to open the box. I stayed on the floor for a long time before I touched the lockbox. Not because I was afraid of what was inside, but because I knew that once I opened it, I would no longer be able to pretend that the life I'd lived since 1989 was untouched by that night. Some doors don't slam open. They wait. I reached behind the box and felt for the small envelope taped to its underside. My fingers found it easily, as if my body remembered before my mind did. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. The combination, Elaine's handwriting. My hands shook as I turned the dial, the soft clicks sounding far too loud in the quiet room. When the latch finally released, I flinched, half expecting something dramatic. But there was no drama. Just paper, a thin notebook, several loose envelopes, and one cassette tape, its label faded, my name written in the corner. Ruth, if you're listening to this, I didn't make it. My breath caught. I closed my eyes, steadying myself, then picked up the notebook first. The pages were filled with careful writing, dates and names laid out with the precision of someone who knew exactly how fragile the truth was. Hospital records, patient numbers, a series of unexplained deaths that had been ruled natural, but didn't follow any pattern I recognized. And names, administrators, supervisors, donors. And my husband's name appeared more than once. Not accused, referenced, initialed. I felt something inside me collapse quietly. He hadn't been innocent, but he hadn't been the villain either. He had known enough to be afraid. I set the notebook down and reached for the cassette tape. I hadn't owned a player in years, but there was an old one in the garage, tucked into a box of things I'd never thrown away because they still belonged to him. It took me nearly 10 minutes to find it and bring it back inside. When I pressed play, Elaine's voice filled the room. Soft, tired, urgent. If you're hearing this, she said, it means I was right not to trust the system. Ruth, I need you to understand something. I didn't disappear. I was being pushed. She described the pressure, the threats disguised as warnings, the meetings behind closed doors. The moment she realized someone had altered a patient's chart, and that the mistake had saved the hospital millions. I told your husband, she said. He believed me, but he was afraid. He has too much to lose, so do you. I don't blame either of you. Tears slid down my face silently. I'm going somewhere safe tonight, Elaine continued. If I don't come back, then they found me first. The tape ended with the sound of movement, a door opening, rain. I sat there long after the tape stopped, the room thick with her absence. So she hadn't disappeared. She had tried to escape, and failed. In the morning, the investigators returned. I gave them everything. The lockbox, the notebook, the tape. They listened without interruption, their expressions shifting slowly as the pieces finally aligned. You did the right thing, the taller man said when I finished. I didn't feel like I had. I felt like I was 34 years late. As they left, the shorter man paused at the door. There will be consequences, he said gently. Not for you, but for people who thought time had buried this. After they were gone, I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at the chair across from me where my husband used to sit. I wondered if he had lived with the same weight. If every knock on the door had made his heart jump, if silence had been his way of surviving. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without dreams. Not because I was at peace, but because the truth was finally awake. The first article appeared 3 days later. I didn't see it online. I don't go looking for news the way I used to. It was my neighbor who knocked on my door that morning, her face pale, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. "Ruth," she said before I could even greet her, "have you seen this?" I hadn't. She held the phone out to me, and there it was. A headline that made my chest tighten before I even finished reading it. An investigation reopened into decades-old hospital deaths. New evidence discovered. Multiple officials named. I scanned the article quickly, my eyes catching on words that felt too heavy to absorb all at once. Corruption, cover-up, whistleblower, remains identified. Elaine Mercer. Her name finally printed, no longer just a ghost. My husband's name appeared too. Not accused, not charged, but mentioned, described as someone who had knowledge of irregularities but did not come forward. I handed the phone back without a word. "I'm so sorry," my neighbor said. "I didn't know, I didn't realize." Neither had I, not fully. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table, the same place where I'd sat after the men came to my door. The sunlight looked different now, sharper, as if the world had adjusted itself slightly while I wasn't paying attention. The phone rang. It was my daughter. I hadn't spoken to her since that night. I hadn't known what to say. How do you explain to your child that part of your life has just been reopened like a wound that never healed properly? "Mom," she said carefully, "are you okay?" "Yes," I said, then corrected myself. "I don't know." She exhaled slowly on the other end of the line. "They're talking about it everywhere," she said. "Someone from a news station called. They asked if you'd comment." "I won't," I said immediately. "I didn't think you would," she replied. "But people are going to come. They're going to ask questions." "I know." There was a pause. "Did Dad know?" she asked. The question hurt more than I expected. "Yes," I said, "but not everything." Another pause. "I wish he'd told you," she said softly. "So do I." After we hung up, I stood at the sink for a long time, watching water run over my hands, grounding myself in something simple and real. By afternoon, the street felt different. Cars slowed as they passed my house. People walked their dogs more slowly, glancing up at my windows. I had become a location, a detail, a footnote to a story that wasn't about me, and yet somehow was. The investigators returned later that day, this time with folders, with timelines, with questions that dug into places I hadn't thought about in years. They asked me to walk them through everything again. What Elaine said, what she feared, what I knew. I answered carefully, precisely. I didn't speculate. I didn't dramatize. I stuck to facts because facts were heavy enough on their own. At one point, the taller man looked at me and said, "You understand that people will ask why you stayed silent." "Yes," I said. "And what will you tell them?" I thought about that for a long moment. "I'll tell them the truth," I replied, "that I was afraid, that I thought staying quiet was safer than speaking up, and that I was wrong." He nodded. "That matters," he said. When they left, the house felt emptier than ever. Not because I was alone, but because the past had finally moved out, taking its weight with it. That night, I took my husband's mug from the cabinet and placed it back on the shelf where I could see it. I wasn't angry with him. Not exactly. I was disappointed in both of us, because silence hadn't protected anything. It had only delayed the reckoning, and it had taken Elaine's life with it. I sat in my living room as the sun went down, watching the shadows stretch across the floor, thinking about the woman I had been in 1989. So certain, so afraid, so convinced that survival meant staying invisible. At my age, I knew better now. Survival without truth isn't survival at all. It's just waiting. The attention faded more quickly than I expected. That surprised me. For a few days, my name appeared in articles. Reporters waited down the street. People I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly remembered my phone number. Then, slowly, something newer replaced the story, something louder, something easier to digest. That's how the world works. Truth arrives loudly, and then it leaves quietly. But inside my house, nothing returned to normal. I woke each morning with the same awareness. There was no more hiding. Not from the past, not from myself. Every room felt different now, stripped of the illusion that time alone could soften sharp edges. One afternoon, I opened the windows and let the cold air rush in. I cleaned without urgency, touching things I hadn't touched in years. Old papers, old boxes, objects I had saved simply because throwing them away felt like another kind of loss. In one box, I found a photograph of Elaine. We were younger then, standing in the hospital parking lot, squinting in the sun, laughing at something I no longer remembered. I studied her face for a long time. I should have done more, I said aloud. The words didn't echo, they didn't accuse. They simply existed. A week later, I was asked to testify. Not in a courtroom, not publicly. Just a recorded statement, part of the investigation's final report. I sat in a plain room with a glass of water in front of me and answered questions calmly, steadily. When it was over, one of the officials said, "Your cooperation helped close something that's been open for a long time." That felt important. Not closure, but honesty. Afterward, I walked home instead of driving. The air was cold and sharp, and my legs ached by the time I reached my street, but the movement felt necessary. Like I was reconnecting with a body that had carried too many secrets for too long. When I reached my house, I stopped at the door and looked at it for a long moment. This house had held everything. Love, fear, silence, and now truth. I stepped inside and locked the door behind me, not out of fear, but out of choice. That night, I sat in my living room with the lights low and the television off. I thought about the knock at 2 a.m., the sound that had split my life into before and after. If they hadn't come, I might have lived the rest of my years quietly, untouched by consequences, convincing myself that survival had been enough. But survival had come at a cost. And now, finally, that cost had been named. I thought about my husband too, about the choices he made, about the weight he carried without ever setting it down. I understood him better now, even if I didn't forgive him completely. Understanding, I had learned, doesn't always bring peace. Sometimes it just brings clarity. Before going to bed, I placed Elaine's photograph on a shelf in the living room, not hidden away, not displayed dramatically, just present. A reminder of what silence can do, of what courage delayed can destroy, and of the responsibility we carry, not just to survive, but to speak. At 72, I wasn't starting over, but I was starting differently, with fewer secrets, with fewer lies I told myself, with the knowledge that even late in life, truth still matters. The knock at 2 a.m. wasn't there to punish me. It was there to ask a question I had avoided for decades. And this time, I answered